Welcome to On the Bubble Podcast, episode 103. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Wait on with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today we're going to be doing an episode on how to draft Arakni. It's going to be the last episode of this cycle. I guess before we move right into the topic, how was your week? Did you play any RTNs?
Yeah, I ended up playing an RTN on the weekend. It was classic constructed. I brought Viscerai. I ended up playing something very close to Florin Christian Logan's list from calling Memphis, I believe. Sort of like a bit of a hybrid list, has sort of like the red line aggro cards in it, like Ravenous Rabble and Gork Tome, but also has the ability to play some setup with cards like 3 Read the Runes, Ninth Blade, and I think it has like the 8D React package, the like Shelter Sync, Shelter Reduce, and Haunting Rendition, whatever the block card is that makes rune chance.
The 4 block that you can pitch to make a rune chant and prevent damage.
Yeah, that one. I think it's Haunting Rendition. I think it's Haunting something. Anyways, yeah, I played that deck. It was honestly a lot of fun. It kind of reminded me. I used to. Not many people may know this, but I used to play a bunch of Viscerai back in the Skeleta days, and I actually really enjoyed that deck. Current Viscerai decks actually kind of remind me of that deck. Your combo definitely isn't as strong without Skeleta, but you're a lot more flexible because you kind of get to have like before you had to choose between Go Again with Mob Skies and the cards that make rune chants, but now it's just like your rune chant cards have Go Again, your attacks have Go Again, and you can sort of just like pivot between aggressive and setup, like even within the same 60. So you can kind of adapt game plans on the fly, and it feels very, very flexible. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. I ended up making finals and then splitting finals. So pretty successful weekend. Had a really good time, actually.
I also went to the same RTN, and I played Victor Goldmane. I actually thought it was a pretty good choice for the tournament. And then I came 9th. I lost to Ellie round 1, who split the finals with Yuki. And then I lost against Yarrow in the Guardian Mirror. It was honestly my own fault that I lost that matchup, because when I arrived at the event and registered my deck list, I found out that my Victor list had 78 cards in it. And I realized that this whole week I've been testing with 78 cards and was talking to my friends and just being like, I wonder how I add like 2 more cards into this deck. Like I was really looking to try and add a Sledge of Anvil and a one more out muscle in the deck. And I was just like, man, this list is so tight, I don't know what to cut. And then in reality, I just had 2 more slots open that I could have just like slotted these cards in, and one of them would have been a Sledge of Anvil, which would have done a lot of work in the Guardian Mirror. Yeah, I went 3-2 and bubbled 9th, so it was an experience.
I remember you talking about this at the start of the PQ, and Jay now knows that Fabry tells you how many cards you have in your deck at the very, like near the top, it says like 78 out of 80, which I guess he hadn't noticed as he was building the deck, which is pretty funny, but it does happen. So yeah, that's tough.
One thing that I am proud about that weekend though is that I did beat a new with my Victor list. And honestly, it's almost not going to happen. I don't think it's going to ever happen again, mostly with the Victor list I was playing, because I'm not teched to beat new. I'm just like, I'm playing the full 3 copies of Thunderquake blue, 3 Mucho Grande blue, 3 Cranial Crushes. The matchup is abysmal, and I brought the deck because I didn't think I'll be playing against many news, and yeah, I just somehow navigated the game and then barely won the game. So yeah, why take out your big blue attacks when you can just attack with it and pressure the new that way?
Yeah, I don't know if I recommend this for our listeners, but it is a strategy you can take. I think that you do get there like a non-zero amount of the time. Victor can just kind of run over new. It's not great if new starts playing multiple of your 8 powers for free. It gets pretty out of hand, and then her Mistblades become must blocks, and yeah, it's pretty scary.
Yeah. I've never beat a new with that Victor list until the RTN day. So Yeah, that tells you something. And I played like 10 matches into new or something to see how bad it is, and it was awful. I went like 0 and 10. So, I won when it mattered. The natty 10 matchup, I won when it mattered.
Oh, very smart. You know it's 90-10. You gotta lose 9 games before you go to your RTN.
Oh, you're so smart, you.
This is not how statistics work for any of our listeners. People probably got that, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, it was a pretty fun weekend. Are you playing any other RTNs this season, or was that your last one?
That's gonna be our last one, or at least my last one, and that was the last one, like kind of locally or like within like a 2 hour drive. So I think there's one more RTN that you're going to this weekend.
Nah, decided not to go. So yeah, there's an RTN on the island for us, which has like a ferry ride, and it's sort of like a 30-minute drive, an hour and a half ferry, a 30-minute drive. But the ferry is kind of expensive. It's a little bit inconvenient, and we'd have to get up at like 5:30 to go, and just sort of we were gonna go, and then sort of ultimately decided not to go. So giving that one a miss and sort of just playing the two local RTNs that we have this season. I'm sort of hoping that we get a third PQ, since I think the PQ invites are going out pretty soon. But yeah, make the most of what we have. Maybe in the future, drive down to Seattle or something like that too. But this season, just, I don't know, been taking it a little bit easy. It's been fun though. I've enjoyed it. I do wish we had another RTN locally though. That'd be nice, even if our scene isn't the biggest.
Yeah, that is fair. Oh yeah, for nationals, like most of the people that are trying to qualify for nationals, I think already are qualified through ELO, anyways. At least in our local area. So I don't think the lack of RTNs kind of like decreases the number of people that usually go, though, right? At least in our area.
Yeah, that's true. It's like more so for PQs that will be the case. Yeah, it is what it is. We do have quite a few people going to London though, which is exciting. I think it's like the most we've ever had go to a pro tour for the main event. So pretty excited to see how our locals do. Typically, our locals don't travel to that many events, so you don't see them top all that much. But usually, when they do travel, at least a few of them do pretty well.
Hopefully, we'll do well. I'm kind of not sure what deck to play at London for CC. I'm like, man, every deck feels so fair. CC feels so fair. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, the metagame's really quite wide. It has started to narrow recently with like Syndra and Viserai being the most winning decks. I think Viserai is just the best deck right now. But he's going to be gone pretty much for sure. I think he might be gone this coming RTN weekend. By the time this episode's out, you'll probably know if he's gone or not. But yeah, by the end of week 3, or if not, then certainly by the end of week 4, I expect Viserai to be gone. And from there, it's kind of like a huge question mark. There's a bunch of decks that possibly win. I think like Azalea potentially gets better with less Warmongers. Guardian doesn't love Viserai, so that potentially gets better. Enigma potentially gets better because I think Viserai was pretty much her worst matchup. But Enigma's good into Guardian and bad into Azalea, so that's sort of interesting. Like Florian could be a potential winner. Really didn't like Viserai. Weak to Enigma though, so there's kind of like a lot of like decks that could get better, and it's hard to tell which ones will and how all that will play out. And I'm honestly curious if we're even going to see before the PT, because we pretty much, even if Viserai LLs at the end of week 3, we pretty much only get 1 week of RTNs and then some battle hardens before it. I guess there are 2 callings, Sao Paulo and Kobe, but I think that this might be one of the most open PTs that we're going to be going into, like have the least information about what the meta is going to look like. I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be working on things, so maybe it will just become clear as people start really grinding for the PT. But yeah, I have a lot of question marks about this format, more than I feel like I usually would.
Okay, then let's move right into our main topic. We have a lot to talk about for the Arakni draft. And let's just start off right away by talking about the block values that Assassin has access to. Starting off with just the Assassin class cards, every card in Assassin blocks for 3, or at least like just the Assassin cards. And they have 24 commons and they have 12 rares, and all 36 cards block for 3. And then moving on, we have the Ninja Assassin split cards. We have 10 commons, we have 9 2 blocks, and 1 3 block, which is the trap, and the 6 rares all block for 2. And the Warrior Assassin split card is very similar. Most of the cards block for 2. So there's 10 commons, there's 4 3 blocks, and 6 2 blocks. And the 6 rares all block for 2 as well. Just talking about the like Assassin class cards, man, Assassin blocks really well in this format. And I guess like the split cards are what makes them, what is their majority of their 2 blocks.
Yeah, definitely. Split cards and some generics are 2 blocks, but otherwise they pretty much all block 3. And additionally, Assassin gets access to the most defense reactions. All the classes kind of have like 2 split cards because there's like Ninja Assassin, Warrior Assassin, and Draconic, which is sort of like the Syndra Fang split. But the thing is that Assassin also has an in-class D-React, and because of that, Assassin just gets like slightly more access to D-Reacts, and I think that's also notable that not only are their block values high, but they also just have more defense reactions than other heroes.
Do you think Assassin is the best class at blocking and playing defensive out of the 3 heroes in this set?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you definitely can build a pretty fatiguey endgame assassin in this format, although I don't think that is the only way to build assassin. And we're kind of going to be talking about that as we go through the cards and get into some of the different types of assassin. But I think Arakni is like less clearly defined by like archetypes and more just like you have like a small package that changes, and otherwise most of the core of the deck stays the same. So you can kind of like lean aggressive, you can lean defensive, you can kind of be in the middle, and it just sort of depends on the last few cards that you have in your deck. And then there's sort of like a bunch of cards that I think all the Arachnes want.
Okay, that's fair. And then I guess we'll quickly talk about the generic and their block values. Before we move on, it's 12 commons at generic, 3 3 blocks, 6 2 blocks, and the 2 null blocks. And then they have 8 rares with 4 3 blocks, 1 2 block, and 3 null blocks. But some of the null blocks are Calming Breeze and Sigil as always. So they're basically pseudo 3 blocks at rare. So generic rares block pretty well, generic commons don't block that well.
Yeah, and in this Syndra episode, we talked about the blue 3 blocks at generic being really important because that was the bulk of her 3 blocks. I think Arakni is pretty far on the polar end where you don't really want too many generic block 3s. Like if you take them and if you see them late, you'll take them. They are fine. But generally, you can get so many in the assassin card pool, and those also discard to the hero abilities that you really prefer to get your block 3s within class. And the big exception would still be Put in Context. We've talked about this card a lot. It's just a great D-React at blue, and yeah, it's no different in Assassin. Assassin also really likes Put in Context. Big surprise.
They like a blue 3 block defense reaction. But it's kind of a overrate card, right? Like, man, they
Yeah.
have the number 3 everywhere on that card.
Yeah, very impressive card, and yeah, really no surprises there.
You know what thing I'm kind of surprised about? I haven't seen Put in Context perform in CC that much. I wonder if I guess it's not good enough. It's too narrow of a card for it to be good.
Yeah, we'll see. I think like if there was going to be a shell for Put in Context, in my mind, it would be Enigma, just because you can transcend after playing Put in Context. So it sort of does like the blue sink below job. It doesn't let you filter, and it does have the restriction. And I think that restriction is more real in CC just because, there's like a lot of classes that don't really have any things with attack or any attacks with base 3 or less. Whereas in the limited format, basically like almost everything is except for like tip off and a few of the generics. So within the context of like the limited format, Put in Context is like pretty free. It does have a little bit of a downside, but pretty minimal. And then within CC, I think you feel it more. But I kind of wonder if like maybe in the right metagame we might see someone like Enigma play it. That seems like the most obvious home to me.
Then let's move on and quickly talk about Arachni's equipment suite. As always, the best in slot equipments are the Guardwheel Cycle at rare. This is, no exception. Almost always converts for 2, so almost always best in slot. They also have access to the red alert cycle, which if your opponent plays an attack reaction, it will get +1 defense value. And they also have access to the leapfrog cycle, which is the one that if someone plays an attack reaction, you can put the leapfrog onto the defending combat chain, even if it's in a previous block.
I think both of these are pretty good and overall pretty interchangeable. I lean a little bit towards red alert. It's just easier to get the two value out of. And because you have so many D reacts, I think the like onboard D react nature of Leapfrog is a little bit less valuable in Assassin than say like Syndra.
Yeah, I think the red alert just converts for 2 points just more often than the leapfrogs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think red alert's a little better, but honestly, you just kind of take what you can get. I'm mostly trying to make sure I have four equipment, and if that has like some combination of red alert and leapfrog, whatever, like I'll take what I can get. It's not a huge difference, but red alert is a little better.
I guess they also have a couple of like one-off equipments that are pretty good in Arakni. Biggest one would be danger digits, and this is like the mini flick knives where you get to flick your knife at attack reaction speed. And they also have starting point. I'm not sure how good starting point is in Arakni.
Yeah, so danger digits is really powerful because it's sort of like an onboard way to mark at reaction speed, as well as it's the one damage, which is really good, and it can destroy your dagger. So if you wind up like flipping to Orb Weaver and you want to make a Chelicera, you can danger digits on demand, so that's really good. It also has some synergy with some of the other cards in the deck. We'll talk about that when we get to them. So I think danger digits is like super important. Starting point, I'm also pretty high on, but I think it's a lot better when you already have danger digits because something you can do is you can danger digits and then starting point to get go again. And this really enables, in particular, the anti Syndra and anti Fang cards, the ones that have contract draw card, defang the dragon and extinguish the flames, I think are a bit of a combo with danger digits and starting point. So I think if you have that combination of cards, I really like starting point. In general, it just sort of makes Arachne like pretty hard to block efficiently. You don't have to have starting point. You could also just have armor there.
That makes sense. Do you think danger digits is kind of like? Do you think that card is best in slot better than the guard wool equipment for Arachne?
I think so. Yeah.
You think danger digits will like generate even like more than 2 points of value sometimes in some matchups?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, it's kind of already 2 points of value, just in the sense that, like, you flick the dagger, that's worth one, and then you mark, which usually bare minimum will give you +1 if you're on Arachne's base form. So it's already +2. And then if you get a flip out of it, or you get, I don't know, an on hit from Mark of the Black Widow, or it forces awkward blocks out of your opponent, you can easily get more than the two value out of it. So I think that danger digits like pretty easily converts to more than two block. And that's not even to mention some of the strategic elements of danger digits. Like it really does make your your on hits that require mark so much more threatening, which is just worth so much. And if you have the starting point combo, it also enables those anti Arachne and anti Fang, anti Syndra, anti Fang cards that I mentioned, and those are also really really powerful. So I think danger digits just kind of gives you a lot of options. You can have a good Arachne deck without it, but I think the Arachne decks that have danger digits are quite a bit better than the Arachne decks that don't. Yeah, the on demand mark is just like really important.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Then, do we want to move on to the key cards?
Yeah, let's do that. So there's kind of a lot of key cards in Arachne. I think a lot of Arachne's card pool is good, and it's about having a good mix of these effects. But we'll kind of talk about them. So the first category we have is efficient ways to mark your opponent. These are ways to mark that also have good value on them. Some examples are like cut from the same cloth at rare is insane. It's a 0 for 4 that buffs your dagger and marks if they have a reaction in hand. The information is also really big for Arachne. You know, if they have a D react and what their turn on offense is going to look like. The mark traps are really good. Lair of the Spider, Den of the Spider. Scar Tissue, the dagger react that marks on hit at red is really good. And then the rares Pursuit of the Pits of Despair and Pursuit to the Edge of Oblivion, which is the 1 for 4, or sorry, 1 for 5 and 0 for 4 that on hit mark, are all also really really good. So if you can just get like on rate ways to mark, I think having some of these in Arachne is super, super important. Marking translates to +1 on your hero ability. It lets you flip, which can be powerful. It can give your daggers +1. It just does a lot for you, and just consistently having them marked is one of the most important parts of a good Arachne deck.
You know, my favorite part about these specific cards here is that they're basically the same cards that Fang kind of wants. If you are looking out for these cards, it kind of like feels like a warrior assassin split card. And actually some of them are warrior assassin split cards, right? Or a lot of them are.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It definitely shares a lot of Fang's priorities. They're pretty much all really, really high picks.
Okay, then what about other ways to mark, like the unconditional marks? How good are those?
Yeah, so those are also important. The best of the bunch is the traps because they're both efficient as well as fairly unconditional. Like there is a condition to make them trigger, but your opponent doesn't get to block them, right? So they can't really stop it so long as they trigger the condition, and usually you can find a way to make that happen. So those are kind of the most premium. But you also want some ways like Reaper's Call or Tip Off. Reaper's Call is pretty good at all colors. Tip Off, you don't really want the yellows, but the blues are pretty okay in your resource space. You'd rather have like a blue Reaper's Call, but you know, blue Tip Off is fine. And then the red Tip Off is also quite good just as a 1 for 5 that's an efficient threat that can also mark. You kind of actively want these ways to make sure that your opponent gets marked when it counts. These discard to mark effects aren't exactly efficient, but they can serve as pseudo combat tricks, giving you the +1 in reactions and the on hit go again as well. And they can also be really strong on turn 0, both when you're on the play, but also when your opponent's attacking you. You do have to be a little careful discarding a card if your opponent has action points and cards, but if they kind of like spend their action point or use up some of their cards, you can sometimes navigate the game state to where you mark them. And even if you like take a damage to mark them, that's usually a pretty good trade because again, you get at least the +1 from Marionette being flipped, which is just really, really strong. So those are all cards you want in your deck, especially in the resource space. And then the last one is Public Bounty. The red one of this is really sweet. It's the generic 2 block 1 cost that gives your next attack +3. Your next attack against a marked hero +3, but it also marks the opposing hero for you. And in Arachne, this is sort of like a leg tap. It gives you essentially +4 because of Arachne's ability. And yeah, this is just a lot of really efficient damage, which Arachne sometimes struggles with. And the +4 is pretty relevant if you can staple it to something with a nice on hit. So, for example, Mark of the Black Widow into Public Bounty comes in for 7. So you can do something like Dagger. You know, maybe you have like Dagger for 2 because they start the turn marked. They kind of don't want to block it, or because they want to get unmarked, and then you remark them, come in for 7 with, which is a breakpoint with the Mark of the Black Widow, and they're in a tough spot. And those kind of play patterns have been really impressive with this card for me.
I guess we've been talking about mark a bunch. How much do you think a mark is worth in Arachne? Do you think it's just worth the 1 point from like the Arachne marionette side, or do you think it's gonna be like worth significantly more than that?
Yeah, I think on average it's worth 1 to 2. It kind of varies a lot. I think it's baseline worth at least the 1. You can sometimes have this across multiple attacks if your opponent decides to block. In end games, this can be especially strong because sometimes your opponent just has to block and stay marked, so you just kind of like have a permanent +1 once they're low enough. Like if they're at 1, they can never get unmarked. So once you mark them, it's just like a permanent +1 on everything, which is crazy. And additionally, some of your flips are quite valuable. They're all like a little bit conditional and situationally good. But the best of the bunch is probably Trapdoor, which is number 6. That lets you search for a card and you can banish it face down. And if it's a trap, you can play it on that next turn, on your opponent's turn. So, and notably, if you search your deck, you have to banish. So something to be aware of. But yeah, enabling Trapdoor is incredibly strong because you just get to go up an entire card, which is obviously really good.
My favorite interaction with Trapdoor is I'm playing 1 Cracked Bubble in my deck. they flip into 6. They go, oh, I searched my deck. Like, super late game. Banishes a card face down. And I'm just like, I'm not sure if he has any more traps left. And we find out that he actually just went through his deck to go banish the Crack Bauble so he doesn't have to draw it again in his pitch deck.
It's kind of incredible. Yeah. Banishing a card from your deck is definitely a cost in terms of fatigue, but there is some decent bluffing equity too. I don't know. There's going to be spots where bluffing the. If you have a crack bauble, that's pretty sweet. And then there's going to be spots where I think bluffing the banish is also correct.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's move on for more key cards. We have a lot more key cards still to go. And let's talk about which red stealth cards that we want for Arakni.
I think the best of the bunch is probably Mark of the Black Widow. This is the if they are marked, it has on hit, they banish a card from their hand. They get to choose. Just on hit, take a card from them is super, super good. The disruption is really relevant. And I don't think this card is too much of a surprise. I'll say that the yellows and blues fall off pretty fast because they don't come in for a breakpoint. So I think it being specifically red is really important, but this card is really, really good.
I agree with you. I feel like this is like the one card that's like is a big question mark in CC of like, is this card good enough in CC? And by the time you're having that discussion at the common level, it's definitely good enough in limited.
Other kind of like universally good red stealths are Mark the Prey. This is the on hit mark. This is a really, really powerful card, especially once they are already marked because it comes in for 4. And then if it hits them, so it's a breakpoint, and then if it hits them, it gets go again. And it also just remarks them, so you get the +1 again on the next one. So I've definitely had turns where I've done like mark the prey. It's just a 2-card 8, and like they're just marked no matter what decisions they make. And sometimes it is very hard for them, if you have other cards in hand, it's very hard for them to block out Mark the Prey because you might have attack reactions. If you end up having the like danger digit starting point that we talked about and they like block 7 and then you go, okay, danger digit starting point, here's another attack. Like it's kind of a disaster for them. So Mark the Prey is super, super impressive as well. This is like one of my favorite stealth cards in the set.
Mark the Prey is a honestly, when I first read the card, it didn't look or read powerful, and then once you start playing with the card, it like kind of performs way better than it reads.
Yeah. Honestly, like when they're marked, this is just like red soul bead strike that then remarks them. So yeah, just really good. Kind of in the same vein, we have Plunge the Prospect. This is the 0 for 3 that gets +1 if they're marked. So it's a 0 for 5 in Arakni's base form. Arakni kind of lacks rate, and getting the rate on Plunge the Prospect as a 0 for 5 just feels really, really impressive. It's just super efficient, which is kind of what Arakni needs. The +1 when you're flipped is also relevant because sometimes it's hard to threaten. Like if you flip into Black Widow, number 1, the one that gives a stealth card +3 and banish on hit banish a card from their hand. If you flip into Black Widow, often you're always multiples of 3 because like your red stealth card comes in for 3 and then your reacts all pump 3. But Plunge the Prospect having a base of 4 even when you're flipped is really, really good. So yeah. For both those reasons, Plunge the Prospect is like really, really good at red.
Getting attacked by Plunge the Prospect in this format feels pretty bad. Like if you're marked and then they attack you, you're just like, wow, why is this card like a 1-card 5? Even if they have like no cards in hand, it just feels devastating.
Yeah. Especially because like Arakni is usually not that efficient, and the times when Arakni is really efficient is really strong. I remember having a turn at the draft RTN where I did like Public Bounty Chelicera, so that comes in for 5. It's like +1 from Arakni, 1 on the Chelicera, and then 3 from the Public Bounty. So it's like a 2 for 5 go again. And then they take it because they want to be unmarked. I play another red Public Bounty, remark them, and then Plunge the Prospect comes in for 8. And it's just like so much damage. It's 4 cards, 13 damage, which is I guess like technically on rate for like your like every card's worth 3 action points worth 1. But when you get to do that as Arakni, it just feels like your 2-card 7s, your 3-card 10s, your 4-card 13s as Arakni feel really, really, really powerful in this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's a really weird dynamic. Is like typically when I'm playing some other hero, it doesn't feel like, wow, I did it. When you do like the rate that you just talked about, the 2 card 7, 3 card 10. But when I do it as Arachne, it does feel kind of unfair. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, we can talk a bit about it, but I think it comes down to Arachne, I think, has the best endgame in this format, both from their daggers and from their attack reactions. And so I think that, like, once you get low versus Arachne, it's incredibly dangerous. I think that's like a bit of a theme with the set. If you get low, it's always dangerous, but Arachne just can threaten you so much, even with a small number of cards, and just get a huge amount of advantage that when they're just being efficient, you're kind of in a spot of like, do I want to give them a full hand and just block and leak a little bit, or and kind of like accelerate their game plan, or do I want to get low and enter that end game like almost right away? And both of those don't feel very good.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, then let's move on and talk about the attack reactions. Which attack reactions are we looking for?
Actually, I wanted to touch on one more set of red stealth cards. I think they're important. That's Defang the Dragon and Extinguish the Flames, so the contract on hit draw against Syndra and Fang. I think having these, ideally you can board them out for each other, maybe have like one of each, but even if you have to main deck these, it's still fine. They block 3, they're a 0 for 3 stealth card. But these cards, with the combination of danger digits and your boots, are incredibly, incredibly potent. Notably, the contract is for the whole combat chain. So you can actually kind of almost play towards setting up this card and make that kind of your game plan in those matchups if you have the equipment to support it. And usually what these turns look like is ideally they start marked. You get to come in like holding maybe you have a 4 or 5 card hand. You get to come in with Defang the Dragon against Fang for 4, and you immediately put them in a really tough spot because you could be threatening attack reactions that are going to give it go again on hit. So you can punish them for not blocking enough. If they do overblock, you can also flick with danger digits. Your dagger hits them. You draw a card, and then they're marked again by the dagger. And then you can starting point for go again to punish their overblock and then still threaten to go wide with the rest of your turn. And this just gets really out of control. If you're able to set this up properly, I've definitely had the experience of drawing like 2 to 3 cards on a single turn. And in CC, that's crazy. And in limited, that is like also really crazy. Like you can often just win the game off of these cards if you can set it up. So you do kind of need the equipment and all the parts and make sure that you're kind of covered for if they overblock and if they don't overblock. And I think when you don't have starting point and danger digits, this gets way worse because even if like, if they like block 7 and you have to go Razor's Edge, pump it to 7, boots, that's so much worse for you than if you just get to be like, I invest no cards, I draw a card, here's another stealth card while you're marked, I still have the attack reaction. When you can get them in that spot, it's just like, is so nasty.
I guess one note would be how contract works. You cannot break the combat chain. So if you do have this, if your opponent has a leapfrog equipment, you can't break the chain to put that in the graveyard. If you do, you lose the contract as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay, then let's move on to the attack reactions. So which one are the best attack reactions for Arachne?
Yeah, so Scar Tissue, which marks we already talked about, and then I think pretty much the ones that target stealth are good. So most of the dagger reacts besides Scar Tissue aren't really worth it in my opinion. But I like Razor's Edge, the 0 cost one, a lot. I think this might be my preferable common, just 0 for 3 attack react, really efficient. 2 Sides of the Blade is also pretty good. This is the 1 for 3 that can work on your dagger, but if you target an attack with stealth, it also gives the attack on hit mark. 2 Sides of the Blade, really, really powerful. Sometimes if you get to like your Black Widow's coming in for 4, you pump it to 7, they're then remarked. There's some pretty nasty lines with 2 Sides of the Blade. And then finally at rare, we have Stains of the Redback. I mostly like this card at red. The blue's also a pretty good blue. This is the 1 for 3 that gives a stealth card go again. And if they are marked, it costs 0. The red one just feels like such a powerhouse. The go again and the +3 for 0 cost is really, really good.
It just feels like a buffed up Razor's Edge.
Yeah. And Razor's Edge honestly already feels powerful. Honestly, like I think like which ones of these you just kind of take what you can get. They're all good. They all have their use cases. I lean slightly towards Razor's Edge because you don't have to swing the dagger to do it. But yeah, they're both good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Notably, these are all just like assassin reactions. This means like all of the, the warrior assassin split cards you don't like that much.
Yeah, I think that there is. I think that you can play a assassin deck that has a bunch of dagger reacts and sort of just get to like swing your daggers, and if they don't block, you pump it a bunch and get them low. And I think that's an archetype you can play. You're always a little bit below rate though, because even if they're marked, your dagger swings for two, and then you're giving it like +3 to be like a 2 for 5 go again, or you can do 3 cards to do 8, but it's just like never that efficient. And many of these also block for two, which is a real cost. So yeah, the fact that they kind of price you into swinging the dagger and then reacting, and then like sometimes if you also want to like follow up with something that has on hit mark, like a Mark of the Black Widow, then it's like, well, I don't remark them, so now I'm also priced into like breaking my dagger, which you do want to break your dagger sometimes, but it is a real cost. And yeah, I think them just kind of like forcing you into these lines can be pretty punishing. I haven't been a fan of them.
That's fair. I think because Arachne's kind of prone to being a little bit underrate all the time, anyways, like playing more cards to stay underrate is not really ideal
Especially when they block too.
when they block underrate too.
Yeah, it's just like it just like forces you to be under Ray, and it's just not where you want to be. I think Arachne really wants to be able to block and pick their spots and kind of punish the opponent for stumbling or giving them space.
Then we have the last little section here, and we say retrieve and graphene Charisilla generation. Which cards are these do you like the best?
Graphene Chelicera, I think, is the most important. This is Orb Weaver Spinneret and Whittle from Bone. I think Orb Weaver Spinneret is considerably better, just because it's like a nimbleism that blocks for three, and then it also equips the dagger unconditionally. So Orb Weaver Spinneret is good, is like really good. The red one I think is like one of the best rares in the set. And yeah, just the unconditional nature of it's good. Being able to buff and on hit, we've kind of already talked about, is really good. And I've been just like really, really impressed with this card. Whittle from Bone is the stealth card that if it attacks a marked hero, makes a Graphene Chelicera. The fact that you need to attack a marked hero and then often you want to get them remarked afterwards so that your Graphene Chelicera has go again is just a lot of hoops to jump through. It's still a good card. And I think the fact that like both of these are rares and that they're the only ways to generate this dagger besides Orb Weaver just means if you see these, you should probably take them and try to get these, regardless of the color. The red ones are efficient. The blue and yellow ones go into your pitch deck for the late game. Just having access to this in some way in your deck is really valuable. But certainly Orb Weaver Spinneret is preferable to Whittle from Bone.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like sometimes you get in these situations where Whittle from Bone is like not generating the Trisla because your opponent's not marked, and that could be a real cost when that's your only way to make Trisla.
Yeah, I've definitely had games where I have to like arsenal this card and then like kind of warp my play around it a whole bunch, and like it's still worth doing, but like you feel the cost. And then when you play with Orb Weaver Spinneret on the other side, and you mean like I just get this and I don't have to like attack them with something that they don't care about the on hit with and then unmarks them, like this is so unreasonable. Yeah, the difference between them is super super noticeable. So
Mm-hmm. And notably, Spinneret just buffs the Charisla right away, so like you don't even need anything else to go with the Spinneret.
yeah, if you have it, fantastic. If you don't have it, it's also fine. This card is just like always good. It's so impressive. I think this card is like incredibly strong. If you don't get the Chelicera generation, they only come at rare. You can supplement with the retrieve mechanic. So pick up the point, mostly at red. Having a blue is kind of acceptable for late game. This can buy back a huntsman. It gives you some go again. It can be an aggressive card. I don't mind this, especially if you're an aggressive leaning Arachne deck. And then similarly, up sticks and run again, especially at red. This is the 0 for 4 retrieve. I think this card is like pretty good. I think it's more efficient in Syndra than it is in Arachne because this is usually like a 2 for 5 or a 2 for 6 if they're marked, which is like still pretty good. So the red one's like quite solid, but it is a 2 block. It does force you to swing the dagger. But these are kind of ways you can supplement your dagger generation. And you do need, if you don't have any of the Chelicera, you probably want a little bit of retrieve, is sort of my feeling. I think if you just have the two daggers and no ways to make more daggers, it feels not very good.
Yeah, you get put into spots where you like want to or need to break the dagger, and only having one dagger late game is a real cost, and you really want to have two daggers. So yeah, I've had games where I'm like in a spot where you have to sometimes even break your second dagger, and if you don't have any ways to pick up or make a new dagger, you're gonna lose the game in the late game, mostly because you just can't convert your cards anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And if you kind of run out of daggers, you are very prone to fatigue. Next section to talk about here is just that there's sort of two ways to play Arachne. You can be more offensive, you can be more defensive. I think you kind of want a lot of the same cards, but depending on the mix of cards you have, you'll lean more aggressive or lean more defensive. I think this largely has to do with the number of defense reactions you have versus attack reactions and pumps. So cards like Razor's Edge, Two Sides of the Blade, and especially cards like Public Bounty, Up Sticks and Run, these like two blocks that pump are making you lean more aggressive. You have more go again, you do more damage, and you're going to be closing the game quicker. Your attack reactions also help you. They both help you get your opponent low and then help you get your opponent to the point where, like, I think one of the most powerful things Arachne can do is just like threaten you off of a two card hand with an attack reaction behind it, or the threat of an attack reaction behind it. If you overblock, they get to Arsenal and go up a card. If you don't overblock, it's lethal. And they can just kind of put you in this spot again and again. And their hero power also plays into this pattern. And especially once they flip, they can attack react to the daggers. So then they get to go like, dagger, dagger, I'm holding up a card. I can react to either dagger. If you overblock both daggers, I can then just attack with the red stealth card. If you don't overblock, I can just pump and you're dead. So I think Arachne's endgame is really, really threatening. The attack reactions both help you get there and then help you play that strong endgame once they're low.
I think one thing to note would be like when you are playing against Arakni, sometimes you just have to like make a decision on like if you're going to respect the attack reaction or not. And that might be like the best way to combat against Arachni would be to like it's like I'm in this spot. I don't think I'm ever beating an attack reaction anyways, so I'm gonna play as though they don't have one. Or the other way around would be like, oh, I can afford to play around this attack reaction, so I'm gonna play as though they have the attack reaction the whole turn. And it's kind of bad to do, to flip and flop between the two decisions on the same turn.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that having the defense reaction in that endgame state is the big way that you kind of break that parity where you just got to play around it for free by having the D react. So you can kind of make Arachne have it, and then if they do have it, you get to play the D react. If they don't have it, you keep your defense reaction. So that's kind of the ideal. But when you don't have that, Arachne really runs away with the game. Other things that let you be more aggressive are more efficient ways to mark. The mark is kind of on hit go again. So if you have like a bunch of mark the praise with reacts to push them over, you can kind of keep going wide and keep attacking again. I talked about the example with public bounties letting you go wide, push a bunch of damage. So more mark lets you be more aggressive. It gives you action points and damage. And then on the defensive side, if you have a bunch of traps, you block really well. Lots of three blocks, of course, are good. And then I think the dagger end game is important in both of them, but it's really, really important in the defensive fatigue decks. You really want ways to make Chelicera at least 1 to 2. And the idea here is that when you pitch a blue to dagger, you get your 1-1, which chips them and is really hard to block. If they are marked, let's say with a trap, you get to come in for 2-1 at the minimum, and that's just like 3 damage without any cards from deck, which is actually really efficient. It's kind of the most efficient weapon in the game without extra work. Fang is like efficient if he has attack reactions. Syndra is efficient if she can keep buying back her daggers, but that requires other cards. But Arachne can kind of just sit there, pitch a blue, come in for 3, pitch a blue, come in for 3, and that's really, really powerful, especially when it's not exactly 3, it's like 2-1, so they don't get full value out of their blocks. It's kind of reminiscent of like the Guardian Hammer for 4, but you have to get there with the Chelicera.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, then do you want to move on and talk about the cards that we think are overrated and underrated in Arachne?
Do you want to start with some of the overrated cards?
Yeah, sure. The first card on this list is Mark of the Funnel Web. This is the one that has on hit, if your opponent is marked, it will banish the Arsenal. This card looks like it's very similar to Black Widow, but it is functionally very different and it plays out quite different from Black Widow, right?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two problems with it. One big problem is that they often just sometimes won't have an arsenal, so it's more conditional than Black Widow. The other problem is D-reacts are really good against Arachne, and people are kind of incentivized to arsenal D-reacts against you anyways. And when they arsenal the D-react against Mark of the Funnel Web, it just kind of completely blanks it because like you mark for the funnel web for 4, you're holding up your card, threatening an attack reaction. They go, okay, no blocks, and then regardless of what you do, they just go, okay, I mark or like I trap you. Maybe you get marked, and like you clear my mark, and I don't have an arsenal because I played the trap out of arsenal. And it's like, okay, sure.
Unlike Command and Conquer, where it forces your opponent to like they can't even use the defense reaction, like in CC, Mark of the Funnel Web lets your opponent play the Arsenal card, which makes it significantly worse. I guess in the same vein, the when you flip your Arachne and turn into number 2 Funnel Web, it's also like significantly worse from number 1 Black Widow as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. Your opponent just gets to like play out their arsenal because they see that you flip, and then or like leave an arsenal, but make sure it's a safe card like a D react or like a Sigil of Solace or something. So they just don't really care.
I feel like it this card kind of like forces you in a spot where you still do want to like mark your opponent, attack and threaten in their arsenal, but some of the times they can blow you out the other way, and that's just not a good thing.
Especially because like sometimes marking them is not so easy. So if you like invest in marking them and try to get your like value out of Mark of the Funnel Web, and then it's just like, oh, this actually didn't have an on hit, it's just so much worse. Like we talked about like all those other cards, like Plunge the Prospect gives you +1, Mark the Prey just remarks them, Black Widow is always a card. Like there's just like a I don't know, Whittle from Bone gives you a dagger. There's just like so many better upsides you can get than just like this card that maybe works, maybe doesn't work. And even when they have an arsenal, just like might not work because they arsenal the D react. I think the fact that you can't tell when it works is really, really brutal.
Okay, then let's move on and talk about the other mark, the mark of the Black Widow. You have yellow and blue on this list. You think these ones are not good? We talked about how Black Widow is good, but what about the yellow and blue one?
Yeah, when it's not a breakpoint, it is so much worse. I don't want to say like blue mark of the Black Widow isn't good or yellow mark of the Black Widow isn't good. They're still on the better side of yellows and blues, but I think the difference between a red and a yellow, especially on this card, is massive.
Yeah, losing the one power is actually just like makes it so that much easier to block, and an on hit that's easy to block is not a good on hit.
Scuttle of the Canal red, I'm also not a huge fan of. This is the if it attacks a mark hero, it gets go again. I'll note that sometimes when you're flipped, this is really strong. So if you have this card on like your Black Widow flip, Scuttle of the Canal red can be really powerful because you present an attack with go again, and then if they overblock it, you can present another stealth card. So it does have its uses, but I think when you're in your base form and you're just like 4 go again, on hit go again, you're just playing like a blank red stealth card. So you can play Scuttle the Canal red. It's just not exciting.
And even in the scenario that you talked about, that doesn't happen that often. That means you need to flip into exactly, let's say, Black Widow number 1 and have this card in your arsenal and or hand. Like that's just not gonna happen consistently enough. The other 4 flips are kind of bad with Scuttle as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, just not really great. And then the last card on this list is Cut Through. This is the 0 for 3 at red that gets +1 and go again if a dagger has dealt damage, and it's a 2 block. This card's really, really good in Syndra. I think it's a lot worse in Arachne just because your dagger has the on hit mark and destroy, and sometimes your opponent just is incentivized to either just give you a card on the dagger if they think you really need it. I think there's spots where that's right, especially if it's a 2 block. And then there's also spots where they just give you an equipment to stop them from getting marked. It's like pretty common for this to happen. And I think if you're the cut through is like you don't really want to block with it because it's a 2 block. But if they block your dagger, you're like pretty sad. Yeah. I don't know. This card has just been kind of awkward in Arachne.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's I think this falls in the same line as you're talking about how the dagger reacts were like forcing you to be underrate, and I feel like cut through is also in the same line of like you're pitching a blue, attacking for 1. If it hits, cut through is attacking for 4. That's a 2 cost 5, but then if it gets blocked, you're coming in for a a 2 card 4. And that's not cutting it.
Yeah, it's just yeah, it's really not exciting. So I would avoid this card actually. I think it's like you don't really want this in your deck. I'd rather have like a any red stealth that blocks 3 would be better. Okay, onto underrated cards. So you put backstab here. Do you want to talk about backstab?
Sure. Backstab is a card that's like kind of unassuming. We haven't talked about it on the key cards, but how this card actually plays out is pretty powerful. And this happens to be so what Backstab does is it's a stealth card, red stealth card that attacks for 3, and it just says defense reactions cannot be played to this card. And the best way, or what most people do to try and beat Arachne, is to set up a arsenaled defense reaction or make sure they have a defense reaction. And what Backstab does is your opponent can't play the defense reaction, so they can't actually just like block this card for 3 and have the defense reaction in Arsenal just in case you pump it up to like let's say 6 or even 7 with the mark. So what happens when you're low is you play Backstab and your opponent kind of is forced to just like front block this for 6 and then basically becomes a 0 for 6 because your opponent has to respect a attack reaction, or they might just be straight dead to backstab.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This card is also really good with like the Arachne flips. Black Widow comes to mind, but any of them have the same play patterns. Any of the attack reacts that work on stealth cards have the same play patterns that Jay was talking about. But yeah, like you have a 2 card hand, you send in your backstab with a card in hand and your Black Widow, and you're just up a card no matter what. If they give you 2 cards, your mark of the black or your stealth card at, like traded for 2 cards because they block for 2 cards and you get to arsenal whatever card you had. If they don't block, you get to trade in your card in hand for +3 as well as the banish. So you're just like up a card. So no matter what, you kind of like go up a full card's value in that situation, and that's just like really 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 good. It can also help you get people low. So if you are in the aggressive strategy with a whole bunch of pumps, backstab is super super dangerous because you can just pump it twice and sneak through like 6 kind of unblockable damage. And then again, if you have like the danger digit starting point, you can punish them for overblocking. So there's a lot of like potential ways to force damage through with this card.
I feel like backstab just like plays better than it reads.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like, oh, this is like a fillerish stealth card, and then the more you play with it, it is like pretty good. I don't think it's like a key card, but I do think it is like a pretty solid stealth card, and I kind of like having at least one in my deck. I'm happy to have like 1 or 2 of these.
Yeah, yeah. It's you feel the power of backstab when somebody plays this card against you more so than the other way around. It's like when you play this card, it doesn't feel that good, but when your opponent plays this card against you, it feels like, oh, what do I do against this card?
I think it's just because there's so many D reacts in this format. It's like a little bit unusual. Most formats don't have so many. When this card was in Outsiders, it was so much worse. But in this set, there's so many D reacts that it's really really good. I also have Blue Scuttle the Canal on here. So I mentioned not liking Red Scuttle. I actually like Blue Scuttle quite a bit. I think it is one of the better blue stealth cards. The reason for this being that there's sort of this like dagger endgame where once your opponent's marked and they're at 2, your daggers come in for 2 and they have to block. So you can, if you have a Chalicer, you can pitch a blue, go Chalicer, a Huntsman that takes 2 cards, and then you can Blue Scuttle for 2 go again, and that's like just like another dagger swing. So I found Blue Scuttle to have having the go again just gives you ways to just like take their entire hand, and once you take their entire hand, usually the game's kind of over. So yeah, Blue Scuttle pretty good.
Okay, so it's like a pitch stack. It's like a pitch stackable to go again at the very end of the game, essentially.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not even like actively trying to pitch stack this. It's just like you pitch it and then sometimes you draw it and sometimes it's just a blue block three and then sometimes you keep a card and you're just like, oh, this is such a good card to keep. So it's just kind of like when it lines up in your pitch stack, it's been there's been like a number of spots where like I've played it and I've even had my opponent go, wow, that's pretty good. And like, for your blue three block, that it's nice that it has that potential upside. Is this better than like a blue Reaper's Call that can mark them? No, it's not. But I think that this card is better than you think and better than a lot of the sort of like stealth cards that don't have too much upside. Like this is better than a blue Mark the Prey, for example.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, then let's talk about the Arachne's deck outline. I think this is what a lot of people are interested in, and basically we're going to talk about how many like blues, how many attack reactions, how many attacks we're looking for, and you just want to go over. Let's start with the blues. Like, how many blues are we looking for in Arachne?
Yeah, I think you want about 8 to 10 blues. Yellows are kind of serviceable if you don't have too many of the one costs. So if you have one cost like Public Bounty or Two Sides of the Blade or Tip Off, you really want the blues to go like Dagger into one cost. If you don't have the blues, yellows are kind of serviceable. They don't swing both daggers in the end game, so they do have a real cost, but they do get to swing the Huntsman, so they're okay. You don't want to go like too far down the yellows, but having some yellows is pretty okay in Arachne. Sort of a bit of a theme with this set, I feel, that the yellows are pretty good. But yeah, around 8 to 10 blues. After that, I think you want about 8 total attack reacts slash pumps slash defense reacts as a maximum. You can have a little bit less than this, but I don't think you want to go too much above this because you start drawing hands that are even though all these cards are good, these are your traps, these are your two sides of the blades, your razor's edges. If you have too many of these, you start to draw hands that are just like pumps, attack reacts, and D reacts, and they don't actually do anything, and that's a big problem. So I don't think you want more than about 8 of these. You can go a little bit lower, but don't go too far above. And ideally, at least 2 of these are traps. And I'd say ideally, at least 2 of these are attack reacts that hit stealth cards. Yeah, you and then the rest of them can either be more traps to be more defensive or more attack reacts to be more offensive. But I like having at least a little bit of a mix of each, if possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I've seen decks with like a lot of attack reactions and defense reactions and being like, yo, this looks so sweet. I have like the premium card, like a bunch of premium cards for Arachne. But then when they play out the game, they're like, man, I don't know how I can't win games, and be like, oh, it's because you have hands where you have to go like block for 9 Arsenal one of these reactions. And that's just like at that point you're like burning all of your premium cards just in blocks, and it's like you're not doing anything, so it's not progressing the game in a way that you want it to. So too many will just like actively make your deck unplayable or just bad.
Yeah, and I think that what you described is actually the better fail state. Where this is really punishing is if you buy a bunch of cards from your opponent's hand and they just like don't attack you or they attack you for 3 and you're just like stuck holding all these cards, or you go second and you draw a hand like this. Um, you can just lose for that. And yeah, because of that, I don't like having too many of these. Stuff that works on the daggers kind of doesn't count towards this total as much. Like you can go up a little bit if you have like a bunch of, I don't know, cut from the same cloth, up sticks, scar tissue. Those cards are a little less problematic because as long as you have a blue or a yellow to pitch, you can still swing the dagger and convert them, and it's fine. But if they're the ones that attack that require the stealth cards, you need the stealth cards to go with them. And if you have too many cards that aren't stealth cards because you have all these attacks and pumps and reactions, or sorry, attack reactions, defense reactions, and pumps, then you're just going to be too inconsistent. So just be careful with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next on this list, you say at least 10 ways to mark? What do you mean by?
Yeah, so I think you want minimum 10. I think ideally you probably want even more. More mark is better. I don't think you can have too much mark. The best Arakni decks just are like flush with mark. I think I've had decks with like 15, 16 ways to mark, and I'm very happy with that. Ideally, you want a few unconditional ways to mark. These are your traps, as well as your tip offs and your Reaper's Calls, and even your public bounties. And especially in your resource space, I think having a few of these is really important. Ideally, this is your blue and yellow Reaper's Call. But if you need to play a couple two blocks to have some ways to mark in your end game, that's really really powerful, because getting that mark once you're in that dagger end game, so you can come in for 2 and 2 repeatedly, is really important. And I think just like having that in your pitch stack as a thing that you can do is super powerful. So I would play 2 blocks over 3 blocks if I have to get these unconditional marks in your resources.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess like just having it being blue means that you get to pitch it early and then, have a natural pitch stack. That's kind of worth a bunch, right? Because if you don't have to work for your pitch stack, it can be worth even more.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it plays out that you get to the end game and they're already marked, and then you can just block with some of your 3 blocks and use this 2 block as your blue, and that's fine. So that's kind of like it kind of works out either way. And then if you don't have them marked, you're really glad that you have a way to mark them. So yeah, any of the unconditional ways to mark. There's also, I didn't mention it, but there's it's the rare that relentless pursuit. It marks them, it blocks for 3, it has go again, and if you've played an attack, it gets it goes to the bottom of your deck. I don't think this is like a super high pick, but it's another unconditional way to mark that goes in your pitch deck for free.
That makes sense. It also blocks for 3, right?
Yeah, it also blocks for 3. So yeah, card is pretty good. You don't want to go like overboard with these, but having a few like 2 to 3 ways to mark in your blue base, really, really good. Yellow base is also okay. Other ways to mark are your threats that mark, like scar tissue, mark the prey, public bounty, cut from the same cloth. We talked about all of these. Having multiple of these or lots of these effects really helps smooth out the deck. They let you convert big hands. They let you the best Arachne decks are just like you just feel like you're always marked. Like they they mark you with a dagger at the start of the game. They attack you with mark the prey. Regardless of what you do, you're marked. Then like maybe you take the mark the prey, then they go like mark of the Black Widow, and you go, okay, I don't want to mess with your attack reaction. I'm just going to let you have it. I'm going to get unmarked. Then you banish a card. And then it's like, okay, your turn. They attack you, and then you have the trap and you remark them. And you just kind of like keep them marked constantly no matter what. I think these are the best Arachne decks. So just like having lots of threats that do damage and mark really help you just like stay on the aggressive or like stay on the front foot.
And then the next thing you have here, you say 2 to 3 ways to retrieve/make Churisla. We already talked about this, but do you have any more notes on this?
I just think you like have to have this, especially in the defensive deck. Yeah, I think if you have like 1 or 2 ways for the Chelicera, that's enough. But if you don't have Chelicera, I want like maybe like 3 retrieve, something like that. But yeah, just having the daggers for the end game is really good. I think the fact that 2 Huntsman daggers don't swing off of a blue makes them a lot worse than the Chelicera, but you take what you can get. I'll also note that 2 Chelicera sounds good, but often isn't, because it doesn't have go again unless they're marked. So if you can navigate to a spot where they're at 2 and they don't have any equipment, then yes, having 2 Chelicera is very good. But sometimes it can really get you into trouble. And I think that keeping 1 equipment for the end game against Arachne can be pretty annoying, because if you do find yourself at 2 and you have the equipment, that is a way to get out of the loop. And you can just kind of like block it, go to 1, and if they're on 2 Chelicera, like they can just completely lose the game from there if they're not able to mark you again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ideal setup in Arachne is to have 1 Mark of the Huntsman, 1 Churisla, and not double Mark of the Huntsman or double Churisla.
Yeah, exactly. You don't always have the choice, and sometimes you have to make one or the other work, but just know that 1 of each is kind of preferable. I see some people just go, oh, you want to get to the Chelicera, it's so good, and they kind of like turbo towards 2 of them, and then it gets them in trouble, and it's like, oh, maybe this wasn't as good as I wanted.
It looked really good early in the format, where it's just like, oh wow, this is like a yellow to attack for 1-1, and it just doesn't play out that way.
Yeah, I agreed with that. And then finally, I'm gonna say this isn't required, but I really like having. I said like 1 to 2 red attacks. I mostly mean generics like Tip Off is really good at red as just a 1 for 5. The Pursues that on hit mark are super premium. They also block 3. Those are really good. The Sound the Alarm that is a 1 for 5. Just having some raw rate in Arachne is really good because you get to do like, the dagger into 2 into 5. And we talked about like the 2 card 7s in Arachne being strong. Plunge the Prospect, well, not a generic, also does this, but I think having like even just a couple ways to actually be really efficient makes your Arachne deck so much better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like this is like a roundabout way of saying you just need to be on rate, right? Like you need to make sure you have ways to be on rate, and you can't just like only play the stealth attacks and attack for 3 every turn, block for 3. It's just like not gonna win you the game with that play pattern.
Yeah, sometimes you just kind of like, I think when you do that, you can win, but you're almost like hoping that your opponent stumbles. But if you have like a couple of ways to just be like perfectly on rate, it feels like you have a little bit more agency to just keep up with them and then navigate to a good end game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's kind of the deck outline. Again, just to recap really quickly, 8 to 10 blues. Some yellows are fine, but don't combine them with too many 1 costs. You want about 8 total attack reacts, pumps, and defense reactions as a maximum. You can have less, but don't go too far above. At least 2 traps and at least 2 attack reacts that work on stealth, ideally, but you can kind of skew one way or the other, or have a mix. You want at least 10 ways to mark them. More is better. Ideally, you have a combination of traps and other unconditional ways to mark them, as well as efficient threats to keep threatening them, like Scar Tissue, Mark the Prey, Public Bounty. You want 2 to 3 ways to retrieve daggers or make Chelicera. Chelicera generation is better. One of each dagger is preferable, but you do what you can, and sometimes you don't see them because they're only at rare, so you can supplement with retrieve. And then finally, ideally, some red attacks that are on rate. The 1 for 5 stat line's really good. Plunge the Prospect's really good. Not mandatory, but does make your deck quite a bit better if you can have a couple of these.
Okay. Then we talked about the deck outline. Let's talk about the 2 different styles of Arachne that we can play. You said it's like more of like a blend, or like you don't have to be like fully one side or the other. You can be somewhere in the middle as well. But what are like the things, the play style that you're looking for with Arachne?
Yeah, so just kind of like a key play pattern in Arachne is attacking with a stealth card and holding a reaction. This can also work with your flips. So this is why, like I said, that you only need the 2 attack reactions, because some of your flips are also attack reactions. And I think the important part when you're doing this is to make sure that you have a free arsenal, so that if they overblock, you can arsenal the card. Because otherwise, if you just like are holding a card, you attack for 3, you have an arsenal, and you're Black Widow, they can just block 6, and then they basically traded 2 cards for your 2 cards, and you don't really come out ahead. So you just want to make sure you can always arsenal after that, and that's sort of like a core gameplay loop that you should be aware of for both styles. In terms of specific types of decks, there's the aggressive deck. For this, you need lots of go again, you need efficient damage, you want lots of mark. Attack reactions play well into this. We kind of talked about that. Multiple Mark the Praise is really good in this style of deck. Tip Off or the Pursue cycle, so those 1 for 5s helping you do efficient damage, again, really, really good. Pick up the point up sticks are good ways to get go again. Public Bounty, also a good way to get go again. So you kind of are playing some more 2 blocks and some more go again to do more damage and get them low faster, and then close out the game with your attack reactions. You can also set up Defang the Dragon or Extinguish the Flame turns with Danger Digits and Starting Point in this style of deck, and really kind of push them down low. And then once they're low, you can rely on some of the defensive tools like the dagger endgame to close out the game.
Okay, yeah. They all seem like very powerful lines and very powerful cards, and this is basically just like a pile of all the key cards that you were talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And basically, like, I think even the defensive decks will have some of these cards and some of these packages, but the aggressive decks will be like mostly these and only a couple of defense reactions, whereas the defensive decks might have 5, 6 defense reactions, some solid dagger generation, and then a few of these pieces. You still want, so moving on to the defensive one, you still want to have a couple of these offensive packages because you do need to get them low. And that generally is easiest if you have 1 or 2 explosive turns to force their life total down, and you can just use kind of any of these. You can have a couple upsticks. You can have a defang and extinguish the flame kind of turn to play into them. You can have some attack reactions mixed in there or some generics, but you want a couple of ways to push damage and get them low so that you can then get them into that dagger endgame with the one Chalicera, one Huntsman, so that your blue, if they're marked, comes in for 2+1. That works really well if you have a whole bunch of traps that mark them, because you mark them, you attack for 2 and 1, you mark them, you attack for 2 and 1, you can do that. And when they get low and you get to go 2 and 2 is when you really take over the game. I think the important thing for this fatigue end game is that you kind of have the best hero in the end game if you're able to set it up, because you can threaten 2 cards out of hand with just 1 card when you go dagger dagger. And Syndra and Fang kind of all need big hands to do that. Like Syndra has her dagger loop, but that takes a lot of cards in hand. Fang kind of always needs to be able to swing a dagger and attack with an attack react. If he has a fealty, he can play 1 card hands, but he can't really like block out and then start doing that. Whereas Arakni can just be like, I block out, now I have space, now I can dagger. And I think that Arachni's endgame is just like super, super threatening. Also, once you flip, you can attack react onto the daggers, which is just, if they don't have defense reaction, is just checkmate. Usually, this fatiguey defensive strategy wins through running your opponent out of cards. Often, you start down on cards in deck, but you'll catch up later because your daggers are so efficient. So I've been down like 4 to 5 cards in fatigue math, including life totals in there. So you counter life totals as every like 2 to 3 is worth a card. I've been down like 4 to 5 cards when my opponent's at like 10 and I'm at like 6. And I've won from there in the end games as Arachne, just because your dagger is so strong. If you are playing this style, sometimes it might feel like you're losing. But I think as long as you are able to get to the right game state where they're marked and you have the 2 daggers, you really catch up on fatigue quickly. And once you start taking their cards, their fatigue endgame is so much worse.
And I think this comes down to, in the pitch deck scenario, the other 2 decks, like Fang and Syndra, their cards are just like worth significantly less at blue and yellow than your cards at blue, basically because you can do the dagger. And that's kind of where you are catching back up, is because their blues just aren't going to convert for 4 anymore. And Fang and Syndra typically will play out their reds when they draw them. They're not going to have their reds again on the pitch stack. So you don't have to worry about getting hit for 4 that often in the pitch stack.
Yeah, exactly. And once they get low enough, you just, every dagger is worth a card. Every turn you're taking 2 cards for no cards out of your deck. That is going to get you there really quick, especially if you, like, sometimes I find that I'll have like a small life lead. I'll be at 4, my opponent's at 2. I go dagger, they have a 2-card hand, and then you're like, well, I have 3 cards to block, and then I dagger, put you on a 2-card hand again, and like that's just going to be winning because they're probably trading roughly like their 2 cards for 2 to 3 cards of yours on defense, and then you get to dagger. And if they don't take 2 cards, you got to go dagger. Here's another card, like here's a, I don't know, anything like a blue stealth card for 2. I've taken 3 cards from your hand. Now your turn falls apart. So that's sort of like what Arachne's threatening to do in the end game. And I think what's interesting is that these playstyles kind of play into each other. Like you can have an aggressive start and then go into the fatigue style, or you can play the defensive style and have like 1 or 2 aggressive turns. So a lot of the cards work kind of interchangeably, and it's really like where the bulk of your cards are. If you have a lot of the defensive tools, you'll be fatiguing most games. If you have a lot of the aggressive tools, you'll be winning through damage both games, but both decks do a little bit of both of these.
Do you want to move on and talk about the matchups for Arachne?
Yeah, we can talk about the matchups. I'll say that maybe more so than some of the other decks, I think that like every game plays out quite differently because your flips change, you're often quite reactive to your opponent. So I think that the matchups are quite fluid, but we'll try to give you some pointers on these. Have you kind of found the same thing with Arachne, that the games are like quite varied?
Yeah, well, it really depends on what you flip into, and
Yeah.
some of the games where you flip like perfect, it feels really unfair, and the other games where you just like flip into the wrong ones at the wrong time, it feels really bad. So yeah, it's Arachne is a roller coaster, no matter how good your deck is.
So I think in general, Arachne really wants to go second. You can maybe go first in the mirror, especially if you're defensive. I think if you're super defensive and you really can't convert cards and you have a lot of defense reactions, going first to do some fatigue damage can be okay. But I think the vast majority of Arachne decks basically always want to go second. And then the one exception is in the mirror. It is tricky because if they have the aggro deck, they really want to go second. But I do think if you have like the 4 to 5 D react Arachne deck with good armor, you're pretty good at getting to fatigue end games reliably. This format's powerful, but like you block really, really well.
Yeah, and mostly in the mirror, right? Because like
Mm-hmm.
Arachne does have some trouble converting 4 cards. So unlike Fang and Syndra that can almost guarantee to convert 4 cards, Arachne might not be able to convert the 4 cards. So if you go first and then they can't convert 4 cards efficiently, then you're just kind of ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll say that overall, I think Arachne is the deck that cares the least about first, second. You can kind of make either one work. I think the spot where it matters the most is against Syndra, though, probably because Syndra cares about going second the most. So, like, denying her second feels really important. But Arachne's pretty good at both going first and second. I think some of that's that you can, like, sneak in damage with attack reactions. You can do fatigue damage. You can mark them. There's, like, lots of ways to get a little bit of value going first.
And I think, do you want to mark your opponent if you go first? Like, is that like a priority for you? Like, would you discard Reaper's Call pretty aggressively to do so if you are going first?
Yeah, I think almost always. Flipping is generally plus value. The base form is really good too, but I think if you can mark them when you go first, it's like quite strong. Mostly because if you flipped into like Black Widow, it's really good, or if you flip into Trapdoor and you go up a card, it's also really good. So just of course you can't rely on this, but rolling early like the more times you roll and the earlier you roll, the more chances you have to like flip into Trapdoor.
And Trapdoor is the one that's, I guess we haven't talked about the all of the flips that Arachne can go into. Which one is the most powerful in your opinion?
It's definitely a trapdoor. Going up a card is just so good. This is why you always want 2 traps, regardless of the style, is because you want to be able to leverage trapdoor. Also, just D reacts are good. I think every deck wants 2 D reacts, but in Arachne, it's like especially important because of trapdoor. And yeah, I think that is just like pretty much the strongest flip. There are spots where you flip into trapdoor and you're going to be sad about it because like maybe you have tempo, maybe you have no more traps, but for the most part, trapdoor is the best one you can flip into.
Yeah, yeah. I think the worst scenario when you flip into trapdoor is when you have no cards in deck, and then you flip into trapdoor and they just look at you and like, nice, their hero power's off.
Yeah, there's definitely spots where trapdoor feels really bad, but yeah, overall that trapdoor is really really sick, and you kind of get to terrorize Fang sometimes because you have the attack react. Or sorry, the defense reaction where if they've played an attack reaction, they lose a life, and like when the fangs are low, they just like look at you and they're just like, "No, like what do I do?"
Yeah, yeah, that is game defining. Mostly because you don't get to see which trap they banished.
Or if it's even a trap at all, yeah, you're just like, I don't want to give you a whole hand. I don't want to die to this trap, and it's just like everything feels bad.
Okay, and then let's talk about the actual matchups. Let's talk about the Arachne Mirror first.
Yeah, so for the Arachne Mirror, defense reactions are super, super good at stopping on hits and dealing with their attack reactions. Your Red Alert equipment can convert for 2 block sometimes if you can find the spot where they're wanting to use their attack reaction. When is the best time? When are some of the best times to try and get the 2 block out of Red Alert in your experience?
I think when they're flipped is kind of like a natural spot to use your red alert equipment. Sometimes like it'll be impossible to find spots where you know your opponent's got an attack reaction, but one exception would be like when they're in like red back, which is number 4, which is the give the stealth card go again. You kind of know that they're gonna use the red back, mostly if they have like a bunch of cards in hand. So this is like a great time to use the red alert equipment. And so with like Black Widow, sometimes you'll be in a spot where you're like, you kind of have to accept the fact that they're probably going to rip a card from your hand, but you can at least get the 2 block from the red alerts. And trying to find spots where you can guarantee red alert will be kind of game changing because you are just kind of gaining 1 life off your equipment. I think if you can find other spots where you know your opponent's going to attack reaction, it will be good to use the red alerts, but most of the time, just it's kind of impossible to know if Arachne will attack reaction or not, mostly if they have an open arsenal. So I think waiting for them to flip and turn into one of them with an attack reaction will be pretty good. Biggest note, number three, Charisla is not an attack reaction. Red alerts do not work on an instant ability, so just a note on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing I've had come up with red alerts is sometimes if you're really worried about a dagger react, maybe you're low. Like if you have a chance to get your 2 block out of it, like Jay's saying, do that. But I've had spots where like maybe I'm starting to get low, maybe they flip into tarantula or the dagger's just like really threatening with an attack reaction. I've had spots where I've gone like block 2 red alert on the dagger to cover it. If they react, I get +2 and I have a leapfrog to cover it. So I've had that particular play pattern come up like more than once, and I think it's not like the main use for it, but it is something to be aware of, that you can sort of like be like, I'm covering your dagger, and if you have the attack reaction, I cover it. If you don't have the attack reaction, then like I've still covered your dagger, and I can like move on to the next chain link. So yeah,
I think one other note for the equipment for Arachne mirrors is like not being too conservative with your equipment is a good thing, and just like cashing it in for value is pretty good. What do you think, Yuki? Do you think you want to save your equipment, or do you just want to cash it in the moment you can get the 2 block value from your like red alerts and your leapfrogs?
yeah. If you can get the 2 block value, you definitely should. I think sometimes situationally blocking their dagger is really good too, especially if you think that they need to mark you. So like if they have both huntsman daggers and like you think they might be wanting to get rid of it to like make a Chelicera or to turn on something, like sometimes just like throwing, like if they just like pitch up blue and you're like, oh, like you kept a big hand, I think you might want this mark, I'm gonna put 1 block in front of your dagger, and it's just like kind of bad for them. Those spots are pretty good.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Mostly if they're in the number three and they have both the huntsmen up, it's like, oh, they really want to destroy the huntsman, so you can like kind of make sure they can't get the odd hit destroy.
I'll say that I think saving at least 1 block on equipment is pretty important though. Like you don't need to save all of your equipment, but I think saving one is really good, both for the like getting out of that mark loop in the end game that I talked about, but also just for covering a random 4. Like once you're out of equipment, mark of the Black Widow for 4 and stuff like that just becomes so threatening. And just being able to like have equipment to stop the breakpoint of 4 is really good. So I think that like it's like interesting because Arachne benefits a lot from working through your equipment. So saving some of it to kind of like play around some of those spots is really valuable. But I also don't think you want to like hold on to all of your equipment for dear life, because blocking their dagger is also good. So I think there's like some kind of like middle point that you, in terms of how you want to be using your equipment, like you use a couple of them early, don't be afraid to do that to get a bit of an advantage, and then maybe saving like a piece or two for late game is good as well.
I think one last note for Arachne will be like not going to one, because they just have so many different ways to do unblockable one damage. Like Hunted or Hunter, which is the assassin defense reaction that can ping for 1, is very real against you. Danger Digits can do 1 damage. Even a card like Bite, when you attack with it, they throw a dagger at you, can just like kill you out of nowhere. And there's just like a bunch of these different ways that it can throw daggers and do some unconditional 1 damage. So going down to 1, or it's already bad going down to 1 against Arachne, but you really can't just be like, oh, this is gonna be my like pivot turn, I'll go to 1 and do something. If you do that, you could just die to a hunted or hunter, which is not a good spot to be in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then like 2 significant for the dagger end game when you're marked, and then also once you get to like 3, 4 territory, the attack reactions start becoming really scary. So I think that managing for all heroes, managing your life total against Arachne is really important. If you there's spots where you have to go low to take over the game, but make sure you take over the game. If you just like have an okay turn and you go low, and then they get to start doing their dagger, and then at some point they go dagger, keep a card, they will take over. So you have to be very careful about when you go low against Arachne, both in the mirror, but also just if you're playing Sindra or Fang against them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then do you want to move on and talk about the Syndra matchup, the Arachne Syndra matchup?
Yeah, so Syndra in general has the worst blocks in the format, and presenting disruption can be really, really hard for her, especially if she has a bunch of these like two blocks that do more damage than defense, which a lot of her hands have. So finding spots where you can come in for breakpoints against Syndra is pretty powerful. She does have some three blocks in her deck, so like your yellow Mark of the Black Widow that we talked about for three is still not great here, but the breakpoints are tough for her, especially once her equipment's gone.
Yeah, like Syndra, like at least good Syndra decks are still gonna have three blocks in her deck, and she's gonna be pretty happy to use one card to block for three. But the moment you can like find big turns where you're coming in for like 8, 9 points of damage, that's when like Syndra has a hard time blocking everything out. So like lines are like mark the prey is kind of hard for Syndra to block.
Yeah, that's really well said. On here, I also see you have watch out to not get blown out by leapfrog equipment. Do you want to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, I've just seen people maybe not blown out, but like Syndra is one of those heroes where she doesn't have red alerts, so a lot of the time she has like multiple leapfrog equipment. And if you're like relying on your, Razor's Edge to push over the is it Mark of the Black Widow? They could just like throw all their leapfrog to prevent the damage. If you're like trying to get some mark or get an on hit off, it might get stopped by a leapfrog equipment. And I've seen Arachnes with like two cards in hand can't convert because they didn't get the go again off the hero ability because leapfrog is a the leapfrog just covered it up. What I'm trying to say here is like don't put yourself in a spot where you're gonna get stranded on cards if they use all their leapfrog equipment, and just like don't hope or rely that they're gonna not use their leapfrog and save it for a different time, because they might just not do that and they might just decide to cover up your attack, because Syndra can still play defense reaction leapfrog equipment and block out your on hit go again with your hero text.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I'll say that the Syndra decks that are the hardest are the ones that are just super consistent. They block good, they have some D reacts, and it's just like they go like on rate damage like every single turn. And then like you try to like make a pivot and they're like, oh, I have the D react. And like if they just keep doing that, it really can slip away from you. I feel like you kind of need to find some way to like sneak in an on hit, make her stumble, have her have some awkwardness somewhere. If her deck just kind of like does the thing and she's able to block you out, you can just kind of fall behind, especially when she goes second.
And like she's gonna play put in context. She's gonna be playing the um the draconic defense reaction outback. Is it called outsmoke? Smoke out?
Smoke out, smoke out.
Smoke out. Yeah. So like it's not like Syndra can't block. She will have ways to block, and like the strongest of Syndra decks will block you out. So I feel like that's kind of what I wanted to say by saying don't get blown out by leapfrog equipment. Is like just because you're going over by 4 doesn't mean it's gonna hit.
And we kind of been talking about it, but in general, your job is to kind of like try to mostly keep up with her on rate and then win through the end game, I think is typically how you beat a Syndra, at least if their deck's good. If they stumble and you run them over, fantastic. And sometimes if you go second, you can just get a good aggressive start. But yeah, a lot of games are very grindy and you kind of need to like find a spot to take over in the end game, has been my experience against Syndra.
Yeah. Syndra pretty good against Arachne.
I think so. I think the good Syndra decks, when piloted well, can give Arakni trouble, especially when she goes second. It can feel quite tough, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely just like had games where I think back on it and I'm like, I don't know what I could have done about this. Like she just kind of always had it. I took my like one or two spots to do my like extinguish the flame turn, and she just has like the perfect equipment plus D reacts to cover it, and it's like, yeah, don't win this game.
Okay, then let's move on and talk about the last matchup here. So this is gonna be Fang. I feel like first thing to say is if you're playing against Fang, you just want defense reactions. We talked about this in the Fang episode, but the more defense reaction you have, the more miserable Fang gets. I think Fang's best line is like still Tooth of the Dragon, and if you just have defense reaction, you don't get blown out by this card, and when Tooth of the Dragon doesn't blow out the opponent, it feels like Fang's kind of hard to be above rate, and then Arachne is just like kind of better at being exactly on rate on their block. So it's I feel like this is one of Arachne's better matchups, mostly because you just have so much defense reaction. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Fang's like one of the main ways for Fang to win is if Fang can get all his fealty online and then just be like super efficient. That can be tough for Arachne, but I think that in general you're pretty good at dealing with his damage and dealing with his D reacts. The fact that you're in class reaction or a defense reaction that makes them lose a life is just like a 0 for 4 against him is like also really really strong. In line with what you're saying about D-Reacts making your blocks easier, the cards that reveal their hand, like cut from the same cloth and sound the alarm, are also really oppressive against Fang. I had a Arachne deck with like two cut from the same cloth. I think it was like maybe like a red and a blue, or like even like a yellow that you can side in against Fang is super, super impactful. It just sometimes feels like it's like, oh, like I have cut from the same cloth. I know what's in your hand, so I got to make perfect blocks. And then next turn, I don't have cut from the same cloth, but I have a D react. And then next turn, I also have a D react. Then here's my second cut from the same cloth, and it just feels like you can kind of like cover all their options. So the hand reveal against Fang is like super super strong, especially in Arachne with all the D reacts in combination.
That makes a lot of sense. I have another note here for the Fang matchup. I think Fang is one of those decks that really likes to play 2 to 3 card hands. Or at least it's like the best at playing 2 card hands. So, which basically means that Fang kind of wants to block with 2 cards in their hands a lot, or they have natural 2, 3 blocks in hand that they want to use pretty reasonably. I think finding ways to like yourself to use big hands than small hands, so like you force Fangs to do the same against you, is a good way to force Fang to be either under rate or force them to find ways to convert their hand, which they can't always do. And that might be a easy way, or not an easy way, but like a good way to try and get ahead against some Fangs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think if you can find a way to play a big hand into a Fang because they like to keep cards in hand, it often just kind of forces their life total down. And we talked about how good that is for Arachne. So, yeah, that's like another reason to do this play pattern.
And Fang is a really interesting deck where they don't really get to choose when they want to keep their hand, right? So like sometimes like they kind of need to keep all 4 cards, and you just like want to hit them hard, and then other times you just like some of their hand just doesn't do anything. They like want to block with 3 cards, and if you just don't attack them, they just can't block, and their turn is like significantly under rate.
Yeah, I agree with this. You do want to be a little careful going low against them, especially if you're running low on D reacts. But if you're staying at like the 7-8 range, you're usually pretty safe against Fang. It's when you start dropping down to like the 4 range that it starts to get pretty scary.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then my last point here is pay attention to their pitch stack. You don't need to memorize their pitch stack, but just look at the cards that they're pitching as they pitch them and note what they are. And in particular, the thing that you're looking for is ways for them to get go again. So this could literally mean pitching draconic attack reactions. If they're doing that, notice that. They're pitching reds. It should be pretty easy to spot, especially the starters. Like if it's like a Sisters of Flame, whatever. But if it's a starter, that's what you're looking for. The other thing you're looking for are attack reactions that they can use in combination with fealty, or if they have knife through butters in their pitch stack, and then you're marked. The reason this is notable is because they kind of need these in order to get go again. And as much as Fang is like a very strong weapon class that can do pretty well in fatigue, if he runs out of ways to get go again, his deck just kind of falls apart because like he'll play like a blue like he plays a blue pump, attacks with dagger for 3, or like plays 2 blue pumps and attacks with a dagger for 5, and you just go, okay, I block 2 cards and trade for your 2 pumps. Now I'm gonna go with dagger dagger, and you have to block those, and you just come out way ahead. So if you notice a weakness in their blue base where they don't really have access to go again, you can actually just play quite defensively into them and you have a pretty easy fatigue. So yeah, you don't need to memorize their pitch stack. Just pay attention to if they have much go again. And if they don't, you can really exploit it.
That's basically the end of our notes there. Anything else you want to talk about Arachne before we look to close out the episode?
I'll just say that Arachne, I think, is probably the most complicated hero to play just because there's like so many moving parts with breaking your daggers, buying your daggers back, knowing when to do that. And it feels like you can kind of get yourself like similar to like how Syndra can be really punishing, Arachne can also be really punishing if you like fall off your weapons in the wrong spot. Also, if you like don't navigate your flips properly, if you don't manage like when they're marked well enough, that can be really punishing. So I think there's a lot of ways for Arachne to punish you when you're playing it, especially when you're new to it. So, what I would say is if you're having trouble with Arachne or you haven't drafted much Arachne, expect it to take you a few times. When I played Arachne at Prague to try and figure this deck out, I did not win very much for a little while. Like some people figured it out right away, but that wasn't my experience. I had like a couple bad sealed pools where I didn't do very well, and then I played somebody else's Arachne deck and talked to them about it and heard other people's thoughts and tried a few things, and then I started to click. But just expect that it might take a little bit for you to get the hang of Arachne, whereas felt like Syndra and Fang are a little more intuitive and easier to pick up. Arachne just has a lot of moving parts with like the hero changing, the mark mini game, the dagger mini game. There's just like so much to balance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, okay. I guess one last thing to do would be Patreon shout out.
Yeah. Thank you so much to all of our patrons. You've been incredible. There's been a lot of support recently. People have been very excited about the Syndra deck that won Christchurch as well as Memphis. If you're interested in that, you can check us out at patreon.com/onthebobble. But yeah, thank you so much to all of our patrons. We literally couldn't be doing what we're doing without you. So huge shout out to you. And thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in and listened to our episodes week to week. We appreciate all of you as well. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social media. I'm at Yukili Bender on Twitter and Blue Sky. Jay is at Ueda J over on Twitter. You can email us at onthebubble@gmail.com, or you can get in touch with us through our Patreon Discord as well and send us messages there. If you ever have questions that you want to get answered on the show, feel free to mention them in the comments or any of those other ways that we mentioned previously. And we'd love to get your questions read out on the show, especially as we are moving on from our How to Draft series. This is the best time for questions. So if there's things that you want to hear about CC, tournament preparation, things about us as individuals, whatever it is, just let us know. We love to have those questions. And yeah, sometimes those make for great segments in the episode. So yeah, that's going to be it for today. Good luck to all of you with the rest of your RTN season, and we will see you all next week.